This short video is going to talk a little bit about the Impressionistic time period of music. And it began really more with painting and poetry than it did with music. In 1872, artist Monet made a scene of a harbor. In fact, here's a picture of that particular work of art. And he entitled it Impression of a Sunrise. And this was the first time that that word impressionism or impressionistic started to be used in art. It was not until about 20 years later that Claude Debussy, pictured here, took that idea of impressionism, what he saw in art and what he heard in the poetry of the time, and tried to depict that in music. Let's just take a little bit, because it was rooted in the art, I wanted to do just a minute here of showing you some pictures, and these are just a few things that are on the fronts of books, but you can sort of see what the idea of Impressionism is. One of the things that happened during this time was that painters used to paint inside studios, but the Impressionistic time period saw the painters moving outdoors to do more outdoor scenes. Here's another outdoor scene of boats. Another characteristic of Impressionistic painting is that the lines are not defined very well, and things look a little bit blurry compared to what paintings did before, as you can kind of see in this particular work. And part of how they went ahead and did that was using brush strokes that were more like just using dots of paint or little dabs of paint. And they also used contrasting paints to set off certain colors to get the light to reflect the ways they wanted it to. And that was something new during that time period. This particular picture has less of that kind of color, but still has sort of the cloudy look to it. Let's take a look at one more. Again, you see the lines are not as defined in previous paintings. You can't really tell if that's a cushion. Looks like it's probably a blanket on there, but or a pillow or something like that, but it's really not as easy to define some of these things. And so in the same way, when we study piano pieces that come from this time period, it's important that we try to make the music sound the way the composer wanted to as it was depicted in the art. Three of the composers from the Romantic time period, now the Impressionistic time period took place at the end of the 1800s and into the beginning of the 1900s, and it fell during the Romantic time period at the end of that. And as it turned into the 20th century with different developments in science and technology, it started to impact societies, and international communication allowed musicians to develop an awareness of cultures from around the world. Musical trends and styles changed quickly as composers explored new ideas. And unlike in times previous, many of these composers even wrote in multiple styles throughout their musical careers. Music was often a reaction against the overly emotional style of the Romantic period. However, to be honest, they were trying to evoke emotion as one of the responses to their music, but just not so over-the-top emotional like Romantic. So, three of the composers that really impacted Debussy, and really Debussy was the most important composer of the Impressionistic time period. It was mostly a French thing, although it did get to England. But three composers in their late works, Chopin, Liszt, and Grieg, all impacted Debussy in his music. And three characteristics that are important to the time period of the Impressionistic composers, which will be important as you're studying. Well, I think I'm going to throw a fourth one in there too. As we're studying these pieces, we want to make sure that we're understanding these different elements and trying to express them in the way that the composer wanted them expressed. The first that really influenced Debussy a lot, and you hear this at the beginning of the Sunken Cathedral, is plain chant or chant type songs. Another thing that influenced him was composers started using the whole tone scale. Like that. It's not something that we normally, it's more of a modern music kind of sound. So up to that point, it wasn't something that was really done. But that was one of the characteristics of the music that was being composed then during the Impressionistic time period. Another thing was a 5-tone scale, something like you would hear in the Orient. Because we talked about that cultures were being influenced by other cultures. For instance, it talked about how in 1889 Javanese musicians visited Paris. And during that visit, Debussy was able to hear some music that he'd never heard before because it was more oriental sounding. And so this is where he got to start to love that pentatonic scale sound. And we could see that in a song called The Snow is Dancing, which is part of the children's suite, which the Gollywog's Cakewalk is a part of that. And so those three were important, particularly in Debussy's music. The other thing is using lots of seventh chords, not the dominant seventh chord, but like the major seventh chords. And you're going to hear a lot of those in these pieces. And one of the things we as pianists are going to have to do is try to figure out which of the notes are more important and learn how to make those stand out while still playing fairly softly. Learning how to play a very controlled pianissimo is very important to successfully playing Impressionistic music, as is learning some new things in how we pedal, because the color is changing and the way we use the pedal will help us to be able to change that color. So there's just a few things about the Impressionistic time period and composer Claude Debussy, and hopefully if you had some time after this, you could maybe go to YouTube and see if you could listen to some of his more famous pieces. He wrote an Arabesque 1 and an Arabesque 2 that are famous for piano. He also, The Sunken Cathedral is a very cool piece to listen to. And there are pictures in his mind, going on. The Gollywog's Cakewalk is depicting a little doll that his daughter had and how he pictured this doll doing a dance, a cakewalk dance. So see if when you listen to, say me pick 2 or 3 Debussy songs. In fact, I noticed on YouTube that you can go and hear recordings of Debussy doing some of these songs himself. You can't see video, of course, but you can listen to some old recordings. So you can get an idea of how he wanted that music interpreted because he's playing it himself. So once you're finished with this video, go and look for a couple of different songs by Debussy to listen to and see if you can pick out with your ear some of those characteristics that we talked about. The chant song, that's at the beginning of The Girl with the Flaxen Hair. If you notice, there's going to be a little melody that starts that song off that sounds kind of like a plain chant. Listen for that pentatonic scale, the 5-tone scale. Listen for the whole tone sound when you get the whole tone scale, and then also be trying to see, are you hearing seventh chords, and how are they using the seventh chords to make the song paint the sound picture that they're wanting it to sound like.